Sean, are we good to go? Okay.
The 12 people in your office, they work hard, don't they?
And it's part-time.
Six part-time. Sorry,
Okay.
6 part-time.
Could you hear that? Okay. Happy
Sean's there full-time, but he gets paid a part-time
That's
salary,
right. That's right. Okay, so yeah, we're ready to go.
Yeah.
Yesterday's report by the Victorian Ombudsman is one of the most important reports that we've seen in the last decade. And let's be clear on what the Ombudsman found. The Ombudsman found that there is creeping politicisation of the Victorian public service that requires urgent attention, and yet nothing's being done. She has found also that many public servants were too fearful to come forward and speak to her inquiry. That's saying some very serious things about the state of our public sector in Victoria under Jacinta Allen and her predecessor. Urgent action is required according to the Ombudsman. Worse, the Ombudsman has found that this politicisation, which is occurring and requires urgent attention, has affected the suburban rail loop. It's affected the Commonwealth Games. I want all Victorians to know that if there's politicisation or a corruption of the public service in Victoria, each of us as Victorians pay for it. We pay for it in the form of higher taxes, higher debt, and worse and diminishing public services in the area of health, education, child protection and justice, you name it, right across the board. We all pay for this. And that's why integrity in government and good governance matters, and matters to every single Victorian. Jacinta Allen has been faced with an early test of her leadership and how she'll be different to her predecessor. Are we seeing any differences emerge? No. Her predecessor dismissed an IBAC report saying it was an educational report. Jacinta Allen and her colleagues are dismissing yesterday's Ombudsman report, saying that there were no adverse findings. Really? Creeping politicisation that requires urgent attention, a culture of fear and secrecy, public servants who are too scared to come forward and explain what's really going on behind closed doors inside the Allen Labor government and its predecessor. These are serious findings and they affect all Victorians. Jacinta Allen has failed this important test of leadership in showing that she's different to her predecessor. She's showing that it's just simply the same old arrogance, dismissing scrutiny, dismissing transparency. Deborah Glass, as Ombudsman, is an independent officer of the Parliament. She was asked to undertake this important report, and her findings are damning. And more needs to be done to fix our public service. We need a clean-up of Victoria's government. And whether it's IBAC reports, Auditor General reports, Parliamentary Budget Office reports, or Ombudsman's reports, we just see a mounting pile of damning indictments of this government and its predecessor. And Victorians are paying the price through higher taxes, higher debt, and worsening services in education, health, and the rest. I'll take some questions.
What should Jacinta Allen said today, given that there were people that would have been scared to submit to that report and it would take a lot of courage to make those submissions, and then to have her dismiss it? Would that have been disappointing for them?
Victorian public servants will be very disappointed and I imagine very concerned that the Victorian Premier has dismissed their concerns and dismissed the serious findings of the Ombudsman's report. What the Ombudsman is saying is that many Victorian public servants are too scared to speak up because there is a culture of fear and intimidation under the Allen Labor government and its predecessor. And that needs to change. If we're to turn things around in Victoria, we need to clean up the way Victoria is governed. And if Victorian public servants are too scared to come forward, we all pay the price for that.
Look, you said it's a damning report. We've seen a lot of these reports in the past 3-4 years, and clearly at the election, very little had changed in terms of public perception. Do you think the public is keyed in on these sort of internal issues, these behind closed doors issues?
What I'm very keen to do is to explain to Victorians how important that link is. When we get reports like the Ombudsman's report yesterday, it's saying that we're all going to pay for it, whether it's in the form of botched projects with cost overruns, higher taxes, higher debt, or worsening services in health and education and other important services.
Well, we've heard that time and time again. My question is, do you think Victorians care?
I think Victorians all should be concerned about this because it matters to each and every one of us. My job as opposition leader and as alternative premier in the next 3 years is to work with non-government parties in the Parliament to make sure that we can apply more pressure around big decisions, whether they're major projects, whether it's important service delivery reforms. I want to make sure off the back of this report and other reports that we can start holding the government to account to get better transparency and scrutiny and better decision making. The government can learn these lessons. It's not impossible for the government to learn these lessons. I'm concerned that Premier Allen is simply going to continue down the same path as her predecessor and ignore all of these reports. My job, on the other hand, will be to apply that scrutiny to try and drive change and reform so we get better decision making.
How do you fix it?
There is an obvious way to fix this problem, and you've got to decentralise decision making a little. Obviously, governments have a mandate to govern, but you get better decisions when you involve people, and that means allowing the public service to do its job, to provide frank and fearless advice. So you don't, for example, announce a suburban rail loop that will have a price tag of $200 billion or more and exclude people from that process. You would involve people in that. Equally with the Commonwealth Games, you don't narrow the group of people who are involved. You involve the public service and agencies and communities and take them with you on that journey. That's how you fix the problem, and you get better decisions in the end, and you certainly get better outcomes.
The Premier said public servants were involved with developing the suburban rail loop because they developed Platte Belt. Do you buy that?
That is complete nonsense. What we know, even from the Ombudsman's report, is that there was a select group, a small group of people, and not often the most senior people in the room, who were brought in under the veil of secrecy to develop up the suburban rail loop. So the whole point was to make this project go forward, irrespective of all of the arguments to and fro. And that's not the way you should govern Victoria. The way you should govern Victoria, particularly with important decisions, is to involve the broader public service. What happened with the suburban rail loop was a small cohort of chosen individuals by Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen to work up a program around this project with no proper costings or due diligence. And Victorians will pay the price. Jacinta Allen is due, we understand, to sign the contracts on suburban rail loop, and it's going to commit Victorians to an enormous project, the benefits of which have not properly been considered. And it's going to mean not only $200 billion or more, most of it debt, but it's going to mean that so many other projects that need to be built around Victoria are not going to be built.
Should Jacinta Allen reveal how many people are in her office?
What does it take for Premier Allen to tell the Victorian people how many people are in her office? Is it any wonder that major projects go over budget when the Premier can't even tell us how many people are in her office? It's passing strange that she can't do that. She's had more than 24 hours to do that, by the way.
Have you given any more thoughts to the recommendations in the Ombudsman's report, any you're open to accepting?
I'll continue that process with my colleagues. It's only been a day, but we will make announcements on our response to this report and other reports over the coming months.
Do we need to rethink protests in the CBD? Is it driving people away from that area that should be fully open?
I do think we've reached a point where we have to have a discussion about how we can properly balance the right to protest with the rights of others to feel safe and to be able to access their city. A right to protest doesn't mean that you suspend everybody else's rights. And I do think that there's an important discussion to be undertaken here around how we better balance that. We're seeing more and more protests which involve overtones of violence and sometimes violence itself. And that's not acceptable to me, and I don't think it's acceptable to my counterparts in the government. I think there is an occasion now to have a proper discussion about that, not just around police powers. Obviously, we have strong views on move-on laws, but also just the culture around protesting. As I said, we all have the right to protest peacefully, but when we protest, it doesn't mean that the rights of others are suspended. We need to get that balance right. Thank you very much.
Great, thank
Cheers.
you.
Time for the rest of the arvo. You got a school thing?